Two worldviews, one timeless question. On one side, Thomas Hobbes, the English political philosopher who believed in order, necessity, and the power of natural law. On the other, Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist who proclaimed that man is condemned to be free. Every argument in this debate has been meticulously reconstructed by a trained AI model drawing from their original works. Hobbes, from Leviathan and the elements of law and politic, and Sartre from being and nothingness. And existentialism is a humanism. The topic: does divine omniscience and natural determinism eliminate the possibility of human free will? Let the debate begin.
I hold, and hold without apology, that human free will is an illusion. What we call choice is nothing more than the last link in a long and unbroken chain of causes. From the beginning of time, every event, every motion, every thought has followed from what came before. And so too do our decisions. The universe is governed not by whim, but by order. And if we are part of it, as surely we are, then we are governed by that order also. The all-knowing God, who sees the whole of time in a single glance, does not merely predict our actions, he ordains them. We move because something moved us, and so it is for all men. You may feel resistance to this idea, as if some spark inside you rebels against the notion that your path is not your own. But that spark, too, has a cause. What we call freedom is the ignorance of what compels us. Take the case of a man, starving and desperate, who steals bread to feed his children. Is he acting from freedom or from necessity, from hunger, fear, love, and the shape of his upbringing? He acts because he must, not because he chooses, and yet he believes, as all men do, that he is free. We are like wheels in a great machine, not passive but not self-originating. We move, and we feel ourselves moving, but the force comes from beyond. Still, I do not call this bleak. On the contrary, it is a vision of order, a world without chaos, a world in which the laws of nature and nature's God hold firm. In such a world, we can build peace, we can predict, govern, and restrain. Reason rules not by denying our impulses, but by understanding their roots. Freedom, properly understood, is not the absence of cause, but the absence of obstruction, and it is in that sense, and only that sense, that man may be said to act freely.
We are to believe that all our choices are ordained, that whether a man steals bread or saves a life, it was all inevitable, that history is a script written by some cosmic hand, and we are merely reciting our lines. But if this is true, Monsieur Hobbes, then I ask, why do we judge? Why do we condemn tyrants or praise the just, if no one could have acted differently? Moral responsibility without freedom is theater, and poorly written theater at that. You offer determinism as a kind of solace, a framework to explain why people act as they do. But in doing so, you strip them of the very thing that makes them human, their capacity to choose. Responsibility requires agency, and agency cannot exist without freedom. And what of the human spirit, of creation, rebellion, progress? Were Da Vinci's visions, or Beethoven's symphonies, or the storming of the Bastille mere echoes of mechanistic inevitability? If so, then not only freedom is dead, meaning is too. Let us speak not of abstractions, but of real choices. During the French Revolution, men like Robespierre, Danton, and Bonaparte changed the course of history. Were they pushed by some invisible current, or did they seize their moment? I say they acted, they chose. That is why we remember them, not as functions of history, but as agents of it. You say we are cogs in a machine. I say, machines do not create values. They do not resist injustice. They do not weep with remorse, or rise in revolt. Human freedom is not comfortable. It does not flatter. It accuses. It demands. It says, you are responsible, even when it would be easier not to be. That is the cost of being human. And that is the truth your system cannot contain. Freedom is not a gift, it is a burden. But it is ours, and it is real.
Monsieur Sartre speaks of freedom as if it were fire, volatile, luminous, redemptive. But fire uncontained burns indiscriminately, and so too does this notion of freedom when stripped from the order that gives it meaning. You tell us that man is free because he chooses. I say he chooses what he is shaped to desire. You call this autonomy. I call it inevitability wrapped in illusion. If all choices are equally untethered, sprung purely from the self, then what standard remains to judge them? If there is no underlying order, no law of nature or divine principle beneath our actions, then moral judgment becomes nothing more than preference. In your world, monsieur, Pericles and Caligula stand on the same ground so long as both acted freely. But that is not how we live. We do not build our laws on the idea that each man writes his own morality. We punish murder because it violates something beyond opinion. We revere courage because it echoes something enduring. These norms are not invented by freedom. They are discovered within structure. You asked why we feel guilt. I'll tell you, because we are rational creatures, because we live in societies that teach, constrain, and form us, because our judgments, like our choices, are shaped by the world into which we are born. And there is no shame in this. It is not the death of responsibility, but its foundation. You invoke Robespierre and Bonaparte as avatars of freedom. I see men molded by revolution, by fear, by ambition, acting precisely as the forces around them dictated. They chose, yes, but they chose as they were compelled to. Their legacy, like all others, lies not in their freedom, but in the necessity that shaped their rise. You call my view a prison. I call it a map, one drawn by the laws of cause and consequence. In such a world we can build peace. In yours we drown in subjectivity and call it liberty. So let us not mistake rebellion for freedom, and let us not pretend that choice, stripped of structure, can bear the weight of moral truth. Freedom unmoored from necessity is not a triumph, it is chaos.
I do not deny that we are shaped by our history, our culture, even our childhood fears. But to leap from influence to inevitability, to say that every act is predetermined, is not only lazy philosophy, it is a quiet surrender of the human spirit. Hobbes would have us believe that we are passengers on a ship whose course is fixed by nature and law, that we commit crimes or kindnesses not because we choose to, but because we must. And yet, we put men on trial, we convict, we punish. Why? If every act was written in the stars before birth, then, I ask again, why hold anyone accountable? Why call a man guilty? No. We judge because we know, however dimly, that people choose. We feel it in our bones. We expect it of ourselves. And that expectation, that possibility of saying no, is the very soil of responsibility. I recall the Nuremberg trials. The world watched as Nazi officers stood accused not merely of following orders, but of choosing to. Would Hobbes have us believe they were swept along by the tide of history? That their hands were tied by circumstance? No. The tribunal did not buy it, and neither do I. These men were held accountable not for their conditions, but for their choices within them. That is the terrible dignity of freedom. And if you doubt that freedom exists, ask yourself this. Why do moral standards shift across time and place? If they were fixed laws, wouldn't they be the same everywhere? No, morality is not handed down by fate. It is built, slowly, painfully, by free individuals and free societies wrestling with the question of how to live. Hobbes' universe is tidy, but it is a tomb. In denying freedom, he denies responsibility. And in denying responsibility, he strips away what makes us human. I say we are condemned to be free, not because freedom is a gift, but because it is a burden. We are responsible for who we are and what we do, not despite our conditions, but within them. And to live authentically is not to escape that burden, but to shoulder it with open eyes. So I do not ask you to be comforted by freedom. I ask you to confront it. To recognize that whatever else the universe may be, vast, cold, indifferent. It is not what determines your choices. That, my friends, is always and forever up to you.
Monsieur Sartre, I will grant you this. Your insistence on freedom as the engine of moral responsibility is not without weight. Men do indeed reflect. They pause, they deliberate, and in that pause they feel themselves to be free. That sensation, that internal theater of choice, is real and powerful. And yet, I must ask, does the feeling of freedom make it truth? Let us not mistake experience for essence. You say we are free because we choose. I say we choose because of who we are, and who we are is formed not by will, but by nature. Your view makes man sovereign over himself, admirable, but also, I fear, a fiction. For tell me, are we not shaped by what we did not choose? Our parents, our tempers, the age into which we are born. Can a man who has been whipped by hunger or bent by fear truly say he stood at a fork in the road and picked freely? No. He moved as he was made to move, and then he gave it a name, freedom. You appeal to the Nuremberg trials, where men were held to account, but consider, even in condemning them, we understood, context mattered. We judged not merely their actions, but whether they had enough room within their circumstance to have acted otherwise. There, monsieur, lies the bridge between our views. It is not absolute liberty that makes men responsible, but the measure of control they retain within the machinery of their world. Even the ancients, who believed in Moira, in fate, still punished wrongdoers. Why? Because law demands accountability, even if nature does not grant pure choice. This is not contradiction, it is balance. So, yes, I acknowledge your truth, that man must feel agency in order to live meaningfully. But that feeling must be housed within a structure, a world of cause and consequence, order and necessity. For without that structure, liberty is not freedom, it is chaos. And so, I do not deny the value of human deliberation, but I place it where it belongs, not outside the deterministic world, but within it, constrained, conditioned, yet still morally weighty. That, I think, is where the real debate lies, not between freedom and fate, but in understanding how the two may coexist without illusion.
I will speak clearly now, for the question before us cuts to the core of what it means to be human. We do not exist as gears in a machine. We are not born to follow the trajectory of natural laws like falling stones. No, we are born into the world, thrown into it without choice, yes. But what we do with that thrownness is everything. That, dear friends, is freedom. Hobbes claims that our choices are shaped by external conditions, and then dares to call this freedom. But freedom shackled by determinism is no freedom at all. If our decisions are merely echoes of prior causes, then the concept of responsibility is hollow, a performance with no actor behind the mask. But I ask you, why do we regret? Why do we feel guilt? Why do we say, I should have done otherwise? These are not the cries of predetermined creatures. They are the voices of moral agents. Human beings who know, even in silence, that they were free to choose. And when we examine history, not theory, the truth reveals itself. Consider Sophie Scholl. She did not drift into resistance. She chose it. Surrounded by terror, indoctrination and fear, she still chose. Was her courage written into the stars? Or did she, through her own will, defy the path laid before her? It was her freedom, not her fate, that made her act and made her responsible. And what of moral norms themselves? They are not delivered from the heavens. They shift, they evolve, because we create them. Across cultures, across eras, humans have defined and redefined what is just, what is right, what is worthy. That power, the power to shape values, is born of freedom. A creature without choice does not make ethics, it obeys. Hobbes fears chaos. He fears that freedom means anarchy. But I tell you, to deny freedom is not to preserve order. It is to extinguish the very thing that gives order meaning. So let me be plain. To be human is to choose. To bear the weight of responsibility. To create values where none are given. This is not a comforting view. It is a burden. But it is also our dignity. And it is the truth that endures.
Who do you believe had the stronger case? Was freedom affirmed or dismantled? Let us know in the comments. And if you have a question worthy of our next AI-powered debate, drop it below. This video features a debate between historical figures generated using advanced language models trained on their published works and writings. While inspired by their ideas, the dialogue is fictional and intended for educational and philosophical exploration